Welcome everyone to today's PacTrans sponsored webinar. My name is Okazaki. I'm the Assistant Director of PacTrans. We're very excited to have you here today. Today we're going to do a webinar on a PacTrans funded project that was a collaboration between researchers at the University of Washington and King County Metro. As you can see on the screen, it's about incorporating ride sourcing services into ADA Transit. We're very excited about the content for today. And then toward the end, you're also going to hear a little bit about a technical course that they've been developing that's kind of a resource that we will make available publicly once it's completed. A few quick logistical items for you. Today we have the Q&A box. So at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A icon. If at any point during today's presentation, you have a question, please feel free to post that into the Q&A box. You can also see other people's questions, and if you like them, you can upvote them. I'll get to the timeline in just a second, but that's where you would put questions. If you have any issues or concerns, you can send a chat message either to all the panelists or to me directly, and those would be the two ways that you can interact with us during today's webinar. Today's webinar will also be recorded and posted on our PacTrans YouTube channel, and then made available on the PacTrans website as well. So the format for today, we're going to have a presentation first off from the researchers at the University of Washington, and then we're going to invite the folks who collaborated on this work from King County Metro to join, and we'll have more of a discussion and question and answer time toward the end of the session. So with that, I'd like to introduce the PI for this project. Dr. Qing Shen is a professor of urban design and planning here at the University of Washington, and I will pass it to him and he can take it away.
Thank you, Cole. I hope everybody hear me okay. Lamis, great. Okay. Hi, everyone. I would like to first thank you for participating in this webinar. As Cole mentioned, this is a collaboration effort between the University of Washington and King County Metro. This effort started 2.5 years ago when I met with several professionals at the King County Metro to discuss the possibility of working together to explore the emerging role of transportation network companies in paratransit services. That discussion led to a research proposal which received funding from both King County Metro and PacTrans. The research team consists of myself as a PI, and Don and Jeremy from King County Metro as co-PIs, and PhD student Lamis Ashour as a primary researcher. Lamis is a PhD student in the Interdisciplinary PhD Program in Urban Design and Planning. And the team also includes several other King County Metro professionals, Matthew, John, and Casey, as indicated in the slide. While the data analysis is done primarily by the University of Washington members, and especially by Lamis, who did most of the work, King County Metro members actually contributed substantially to the work in terms of research questions and ideas, provision of the data, and interpretation of empirical results. I therefore want to take this opportunity to thank my King County Metro partners for their contribution to this work, as well as their participation in today's webinar in the middle of very busy work schedules for them. I hope that this research, which in some ways is exploratory, can be nevertheless informative as well as stimulating as we strive to better serve persons with disabilities. These people are a most disadvantaged population group in urban transportation. Now I would like to yield this virtual podium to Lamis. Lamis.
Thank you, Dr. Shen, for the introduction, and thank you everyone who's joined us today. I'll start by building some background information about ADA Paratransit, FTA regulations, and alternative paratransit services for those who don't know a lot about it. So what is ADA Paratransit? ADA is also known as the Americans with Disabilities Act. It requires transit agencies to provide a complementary service for people with disabilities and elderlies in the form of origin to destination trips operated within transit agencies' fixed route jurisdictional boundaries. Some agencies, of course, like King County Metro, even go beyond these boundaries. And transit agencies often use private contractors to provide the operations of paratransit. So they offer either a van pooling service in which riders share trips in accessible vans, or through third-party vouchers used for taxi cabs. But at minimum, drivers must help riders to enter and exit the vehicle, which is also known as a curb-to-curb trip. And they also sometimes provide additional assistance as needed in the form of either door-to-door or hand-to-hand, sometimes in extreme cases. And as the name implies, door-to-door means that the driver helps the client from the door of their origin point to the door of their destination. And in the case of hand-to-hand, the assistance goes even beyond that. So sometimes they help them from inside their origin point or their home location to the inside also of their destination points. So how does ADA Paratransit work? First, people with disabilities, they have to go through a certification process. And that process is necessary to evaluate their ability to use fixed route and determine their type of eligibility for paratransit services. Some people receive conditional eligibility, unconditional or temporarily, and that depends on the level of disability they have and some external factors such as climate, topography, etc. So eligible riders are then able to book trips via phone, which is also known as dial-a-ride, at least 24 hours ahead of their trip. And they can also do so like up to 14 days ahead of their trip, but at minimum, it has to be 24 hours ahead. And most trips are shared. The average capacity of ADA vans is around 11 seats, but it rarely never actually reaches full capacity. And then riders are picked from their origin points to their destinations while offering them the assistance that they need. So as the population in the US continues to grow, the demand for paratransit services increases, and so as the cost of providing this service. And for those who are not familiar with it, this is really a very expensive service to provide. Like here in King County, it costs around $50 per trip. So as a result, agencies in the US are constantly looking for solutions and alternative services that reduce operational costs and also help them to maintain high service levels and improve the overall quality of the service. And we live now in the era of shared mobility. So among the most popular alternatives that are being investigated currently is providing paratransit services through transportation network companies such as like Lyft, Uber, Via. And that is exactly what we aim to explore in this study. And before I talk more about that, I will start by defining ADA Paratransit alternative services that are approved by the FTA Legal Counsel. First, the service should be subsidized by transit agencies for ADA clients. And the mode choice between ADA Paratransit, so the conventional service, and the alternative service should be completely up to the client. So transit agencies cannot actually steer clients to use the alternative service. At the same time, should the client choose alternative service, that should not impact their complete rights in scheduling trips using ADA Paratransit service or the conventional service. And lastly, transit agencies should not own, operate, or control the vehicles used for the alternative service. So in general, new mobility services, including ride sourcing, create exciting opportunities for building new partnerships between transit agencies and transportation network companies or TNCs. That especially the case because of the ability of TNCs to improve mobility by filling some service gaps, increase mobility options, and reduce operational costs. So in this research, we asked and answered two main questions regarding transit agencies and transportation network companies' partnerships to provide what's known as same-day paratransit service. And I'll start with the first question for this section, which is, what are the opportunities and barriers to the delivery of same-day paratransit service through transit agencies and transportation network companies' partnerships? And to answer this question, we examined existing pilot projects in which the service has been already implemented, and also examined TNC business model and operational norms to analyze the main opportunities, but more importantly, the barriers and conditions to this partnership. And I'll be talking about this second question in the second part of this study. So in this section, I'll be talking more about the main pilot projects here in the US, the state city they operate in, their pilot design, and some lessons learned. However, there are very few case studies where alternative paratransit service is offered through TNC, and all of the existing partnerships are still in pilot shape. But we have studied the major pilot projects here in the US and we took a look at like their design for the pilot and some restrictions that they've been using. And the first and most developed one is the Ride Flix by MBTA, which operates in Boston, Massachusetts. And that started around 2016. And their eligible clients pay the first $2 of the trip. And then MBTA subsidizes up to $40 per trip. I believe they started off with $20, but then they extended that. And then if the trip exceeds the $42 in total, the remaining will be paid again by the client. And MBTA places a monthly cap based on the rider's past usage for the ride, which is ADA Paratransit service that they offer, so the conventional service. And all of the eligible clients for the ride can use this service. Now, in the case of Abilities Ride, which operates in Houston, Texas, the rider pays the first $5 and transit agency subsidizes up to $15 per trip. So again, anything exceeds the $20 in total will be paid by the rider again. And they place some trip cap up to 4 trips per day. And this service is optional for Metro Access clients, so eligible ADA clients for the service. So same thing in Ride Austin, which obviously operates in Austin, Texas. So same subsidy system. However, they have more like an area restriction to who can use it. So they only operate in areas that lack fixed route, but still has enough paratransit riders. And the 4 case study we looked at is eHail Pilot in New York, which subsidizes the first $15 of the trip. So the rider basically doesn't have to pay any initial amount, but if their trip exceeded the $15, they will have to cover the remaining amount. They do also have a ride cap, which is 16 trips per month. And this is a small pilot project, so they only have it for 200 Access a Ride eligible clients to gather their feedback and then expand that pilot project. And the final case we examined was RTC On Demand, which operates in Nevada. And they use a dynamic subsidy in which the rider pays the first $3, and then they subsidize the next portion of the trip to cover up to 10 miles. So regardless of the cost of the trip, they will still cover 10 miles. And they also have a very interesting monthly cap system that's calculated based on the previous 6 months of paratransit ridership. And they also like change the eligibility or your cap every 6 months. So to avoid confusion, as I'm doing this presentation, when I'm referring to ADA Paratransit, I refer to the conventional ADA Paratransit service, which is operated through a van pooling service. And when I say same day service, I'm referring to the alternative paratransit service, which is operated through transit agency and transportation network companies partnerships. All right. So from these cases, the main opportunities for same-day service is that it increases mobility options for ADA clients. It enhances the scheduling flexibility, so clients can book a trip when needed and not have to wait a whole day for their trip. And it also had a lot of cost reductions for the overall paratransit service. The major cost reduction was seen in the average cost per trip, but not the total. Like in some cases, it reached up to 80% reduction in the average cost per trip, but the total reduction was around 20% of all paratransit services, especially at the beginning of these pilots. However, we found that although the results were very positive at the beginning, the same-day service enabled by TNCs induced higher demands and sometimes unnecessary demands, which increased the usage for their service, even sometimes by clients who were almost idle before that service. So they were registered, but they were barely using the service before. And because also agencies are providing tech-enabled service for a vulnerable group, there were many challenges like clients' ability to use smartphones or apps or having online payment methods, etc. But agencies were able to address these challenges by making it also available as dial-a-ride, but through TNCs in this case. And we finally concluded that trip diversion between ADA Paratransit and same-day service through TNCs should consider the trip length, type of accommodation, and mobility devices that the clients use, and also paratransit geographic availability and efficiency, which I'll talk about in more details in the second part of the study. But before I dive deeper into the second part of the study, I will briefly talk about Access Paratransit, which is the main case that we used for this study, which is operated by King County Metro, why they're considering same-day service, and what are their pilot project plans. And we have with us Access team who will talk about it in more details. But Access Transportation is the ADA complementary paratransit service provided by King County Metro here in King County, Washington State. And under normal service conditions, Access provides approximately 1 million trips a year for around like 12,000 registered clients. Of course, that's before COVID-19. And so why are they considering the same-day service? Because it's in line with their vision in providing the best possible transportation services and improve regional mobility and quality of life in King County. Hence, their pilot project goals are to increase mobility options and flexibility through same-day service and increase the overall efficiency of paratransit services. Excuse me. And like many other transportation-related projects, King County Metro's pilot was postponed due to COVID-19 and is tentatively scheduled to start in the third quarter of 2022. Hopefully, the findings from this study can provide useful guidance for King County Metro and other transit agencies that plan to develop multimodal paratransit service in the era of shared mobility. So moving on to the second part of the study, and this section I'll be talking about our second research question and the methods we use to answer it, including trip diversion benchmarks, conditions, and scenario planning. So the second question was, under which conditions and scenarios can partnering with TNC efficiently and equitably supplement paratransit services? And to answer this question, we use our findings from the first part of the study, so the barriers we kind of identified, and we translated them into benchmarks for the analysis. And we developed different conditions and scenarios under which transit agencies and transportation network partnerships are most effective, especially in providing same-day paratransit service. So again, to recap, the opportunities we explored were mainly the scheduling flexibility, the ability to provide same-day service using TNCs, and increasing mobility options and reducing operational costs. On the other hand, there are major limitations to this partnership, including limitations that are inherent to TNC business model, pricing of TNC trips, and efficiency of existing ADA paratransit. So these barriers were translated into benchmarks for trip diversion. So TNC business model limitations are primarily seen in the lack of wheelchair accessible vehicles and the driver's hiring process, which does not include a training to provide ADA level of assistance, which limits, of course, the number of ADA clients who can use the service depending on their disability level and other mobility assistant needs. And similarly, the dynamic pricing and surge pricing that TNCs adopt limits the free of charge length of trip depending on the subsidy amount set by agencies and the time of the day also, like is it during peak hours or non-peak hours, because the price changes according to demand. And finally, ADA paratransit efficiency depends on the number of riders sharing trips, which vary across different geographic locations. Hence, trip diversion rate can vary also across areas to avoid disrupting conventional ADA paratransit service. And finally, we converted all these benchmarks into measurable conditions for trip diversion. So we can use them to actually measure the maximum potential trip diversion for TNCs, giving all these barriers. And I'll be talking about these conditions one by one. So the first condition is about mobility assistance that can be offered by TNC drivers. And the type of mobility assistance required by the client is determined by transit agencies according, of course, to the client's disability type and maybe severity of their disability. And since TNC drivers are not trained to provide the level of assistance that ADA clients require, we specified the first condition for trip diversion as curb-to-curb trips only. So the driver does not have to go beyond helping the rider embark and disembark from the vehicle. And in the second condition, we investigated how many miles can the subsidy amount suggested by King County Metro in this case, which is $40, how many miles it can cover without having the clients pay for any additional amount. So we analyzed the dynamic pricing of TNCs, especially here in King County, and we found that on average, a $40 subsidy would cover 10 miles during non-peak hours and 5 miles during peak hours. So we used the intersection between the time period when the trip started and then how many miles it can cover, so the trip distance, to find out basically the trip diversion according to this condition. And in the third condition, we investigated the impact of trip diversion from ADA Paratransit to same-day service, the impact of that on ADA Paratransit efficiency by looking at spatial clustering of high efficiency and low efficiency trips before and after trip diversion. So we can get a sense of the areas that can be most impacted by trip diversion. And we used, because we did not have a specific cost data for ADA paratransit trips, we used a mile per passenger as an indicator for operational efficiency. And finally, we looked at different combinations of these conditions as different scenarios to explore for the trip diversion. So we kind of measured then the maximum diversion rate for every condition on its own, and then for combinations of these conditions. And again, we used access per transit trips data. We used the data for 2019 because it was the most recent normal operation year before COVID-19. And we had a lot of, King County Metro provided us with detailed data that we needed. So we had trips data that included the origin, destination, the distance of the trip, and also the number of passengers sharing each trip. And we also had clients data, which included like their age, gender, location, and the mobility assistance required by each client. And we built kind of two different scenarios from these conditions. The first scenario, which looks at fixed subsidy amount. So like the case of what King County Metro suggested, like having a $40 subsidy and then investigating how many trips can be diverted using all the conditions I talked about before. But the second scenario, we looked at a dynamic subsidy instead. So not considering a fixed amount of subsidy, but considering the 10 miles. And then regardless of how much that will cost, we kind of investigated how many trips can be diverted. So finally, in this section, I will show the results from each condition separately and also for the different scenarios. And I will talk about some conclusions and hopefully we'll open it up for discussion. So by applying the first condition only, which is the mobility assistance, the results show that only 29% of access trips in 2019 could have been diverted to TNCs. So only 29% of the trips were curb to curb. And if we apply the second condition only, which is that trip distance time of the day intersection, we found that a total of 63% of access trips in 2019 could have been diverted to TNCs. And that breaks down to 70% during off-peak hours and almost 33% during peak hours. And if we intersected these two conditions together, we found that only 17.7% of total access trips can be diverted to TNCs. However, in the case of using a dynamic subsidy that covers 10 miles, regardless of how much that will cost, the percentage can go up to 21% of trip diversion. And if we look at the comparison between spatial clustering of high efficiency areas and low efficiency areas, we can see that some areas went from statistically significant to basically random, so losing some of its efficiency for ADA paratransit, which means that ADA paratransit efficiency might be impacted or reduced by trip diversion, and this can also impact the accessibility of ADA paratransit service, maybe the waiting times, the frequency of service, or simply increase the cost for it even more. All right, and if we want to add limitations to the service area from the third condition, the percentage for trip diversion can go down to 11% in the first scenario in the fixed subsidy and 15% in the second scenario, the dynamic subsidy. And this is just like a map out of the divertible trips after each of these conditions is being added. So in conclusion, this research helped us understanding the implications of the different barriers to providing alternative paratransit service using TNCs, or in other words, same-day service. Especially, we were able to understand the impact of trip length and schedule time for the trip, TNC dynamic pricing, the type of accommodation or mobility assistance required by clients, operational efficiency, especially a geographic operational efficiency for ADA paratransit trips, not the same day service. And also trip diversion to TNCs really depend on, it actually depends on the subsidy amount, but it depends more on the availability of trained drivers and wheelchair accessible vehicles by TNCs, because that's where the reduction was the highest. And also a higher subsidy amount, it can divert more trips, but it can also induce higher unnecessary demand. And also ADA paratransit efficiency and availability can be impacted by the rate of diversion to TNC same-day service. So there should be a balance and a break-even point in which the subsidy amount can be set to increase the trip diversion rate to an extent that does not impact ADA paratransit efficiency and also does not induce unnecessary demand. And this also can be done by using a combination of dynamic subsidy that takes into account the time of the day and distance for the trip, but also a combination with trips cap, as we saw earlier, like considering the client's previous ridership for ADA paratransit service, and also maybe their home location or the geographic location of the origin of the trips. And before I yield it back to Cole, I would like to let you know that we also have prepared a self-instructed technical course, which will walk you through all the analysis done in this research step by step. And Cole will provide you with more details on how to access this course. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Cole?
Thanks, Lamis. Yeah, so, and this actually gets to one of the questions that was posed during the presentation. So this presentation, as well as all of the supplemental materials, a technical course, will all be made available. The videos will be posted on the PacTrans YouTube channel, and then we'll create a web post right on our webpage for all of it as well. And we will email everyone who registered for today's webinar with links to all of that. So you'll have access to all of these materials. Now I'd like to move into the discussion time. And I'd like to introduce the King County Metro collaborators who are going to join us for the discussion section. Don Okazaki is the Community Access Program Administrator for King County Metro. Matthew Weidner is a Senior Planner at King County Metro, and Jeremy Trenhaile is a Project Manager at King County Metro as well. Welcome. I want to remind everyone in the audience, if as you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box, because the rest of our time we will be primarily relying on you and what you're interested in hearing about. I did want to go, we had one question that got answered in the Q&A box, but for those who may not have noticed, I want to make sure that everyone kind of got access to that response. So we did have one question asking if this presentation focuses strictly on opt-in services or supplemental service where the agency and transit provider assign overflow trips to TNCs, or both. And Don, you had posted an answer, but if you wouldn't mind articulating that just for those who didn't see the question in the Q&A box.
Yeah, you know, basically I was saying the focus wasn't really on overflow trips in the sense that I understand them, you know, on day-to-day unexpected demand you put on overflow. This was very specific to analyzing how, what the capacity is and the efficiencies could be on a TNC for providing a same-day service, which I think the person who would ask would consider a supplemental option. And that's why the focus, by the way, was more on the effects it would have on access. And what we would say is more so, there was one word that that was used as unnecessary demand. We don't consider it unnecessary demand. We would say it would be an unexpected demand. Anytime we're doing a same-day service pilot, we are looking at two aspects. You know, providing more spontaneous trips for customers, as well as, you know, doing it in a cost-effective way. So as many transit agencies, we try to balance both. So this focus was more on what is the efficiencies we can do on TNCs. And, you know, we've went to many presentations where it's a constant balance. You also don't want to make it so limiting that it doesn't provide that spontaneous ability for customers to take advantage of it. So, yeah, but that was the focus of this. And if there's any other further questions, let me know.
Great, thank you. We had one quick comment in the Q&A box that I believe it's the Massachusetts Bay Transit Authority also issues 8 rides per week on demand to each paratransit customer to use as they will. I just wanted to make sure I'm covering all of the things that are coming through here. And then here's another comment, but I would imagine that some folks will probably want to weigh in on this one. Although dynamic subsidies create a cost risk for agencies, it seems that they simplify the costs for the riders. They know what they're going to get for a set cost, and they also address potential equity concerns that could result from the way TNC prices their services to customers. Does anyone want to comment on that?
I can maybe comment. I think what we've seen is that, I think especially as you get to maybe the outer areas, the outer urban areas where people may be traveling a little bit longer than in the urban core, I think you see from some of the modeling is that it can really impact the distance that someone can travel. So if you're, you know, a rider that lives in maybe an outer suburban or kind of a ring community around the urban core, and you need to get into, you know, the urban area for a doctor's appointment or something, and there's a surcharge during that time. If you don't have a dynamic model, you may be limiting people's access to take those trips that they need.
Okay. Can you, especially for the folks who just joined us from King County Metro, can you tell us a little bit more about access transportation, about kind of who your clients are, where your service area is, maybe some unique issues that you face?
Yeah, I can do give it a little more background. So Access is as was mentioned earlier, is the ADA Complimentary Paratransit service for King County Metro. So King County as a whole covers about 2,300 square miles, includes Seattle and the neighboring municipalities and unincorporated areas. For access, we provide origin destination service, and we also include a hand-to-hand service. And we utilize 30-minute pickup and appointment windows, which for the appointment windows is fairly unique a service. So for geographic, some considerations or constraints that we have in this area, we have a lot of water around our core areas. So the Puget Sound, Lake Washington, Ship Canal, they can limit the street network and cause increased traffic congestion during peak hours. And we also have a lot of steep hills along key travel corridors, so it can make access in and out of some areas fairly challenging. For ridership was mentioned, we averaged pre-COVID about a little over 1 million boardings per year. Right now in 2021, we're probably going to hit around 560,000+. So we're at about right now about 52% of previous boardings. Average trip distance, we do about 11.25 mile pre-COVID. Since COVID hit, we're at about 8.33 miles right now. It's a little bit of a change in our distance. One thing that I think we might be a little bit on the higher end in terms of lift boardings. About 40% of our access trips are categorized as requiring a lift, which just anecdotal my experience, other agencies we've seen like 20 to 30%. So we feel like we're maybe a little bit on the higher end there. That may be unique to us. Fares, we're $1.75 a fare, which I think is a fairly low fare compared to other agencies across the country. And that's about it, I think, for kind of some general overview and some unique facets of our system.
Great, thank you. We have had a few more questions come in, and I know that folks have been kind of answering those in the Q&A panel as well, but I do want to vocalize them for those who are just listening. So one of the questions was, is King County Metro access provided with 100% dedicated vehicles? And if so, having any labor shortages during this specific time period that might affect premium usage? And Matthew, you had kind of weighed in on this. I don't know who's best to respond here, but.
Yeah, I can chime in on that. So yeah, our current service split is about 80% with dedicated vehicles and 20% we call overflow provided via taxi trips. And yes, labor shortages are a challenge. We also have some vaccine mandates, which were implemented by our county executive. Those will go into effect in January, so we are monitoring that situation closely. But the hiring of drivers is a critical issue at the moment.
Great, thank you. And then another one that had just come in, does King County Metro contract directly with TNC providers, or is the TNC provider contract held by a subcontractor?
I can take this. So we have not yet contracted with a TNC provider. As a part of this pilot, right now we've kind of relaunched our redevelopment of what a same-day service option for Metro might look like. So we're in the process of working with our advisory group to scope out the service parameters. And we're working towards a goal of Q3 2022 to launch a pilot utilizing some type of TNC or taxi or other service model.
On that subject, do you want to talk a little bit more about the status of the same-day service pilot?
Yeah, so I can maybe just give a little bit of background, kind of maybe the history, and then where we're at. So a lot of our work initially started kind of 2016, 2017. We had a big community engagement, customer engagement around our service and a potential service change. And so one of the things that came out of that was a strong desire from our customers to have a same-day service option. So for a couple of years, we did some significant research. We had a small test project that we launched, and then we partnered with University of Washington and Lamis and Dr. Shen to do this research. And then COVID hit. And so things kind of were put on hold. And now that we're kind of starting to re-engage on this, we're going through kind of the redevelopment of our service parameters, what we think that model might look like. Because as everyone knows, a lot of things have changed from 2-3 years ago. So right now we're kind of re-engaging, seeing what's in the landscape and redeveloping from there. So we're hoping to launch something in the form of a pilot in Q3 of 2022. And a lot of that work is going on now, and some of that will be informed by the work that Lamis has done in this research.
Great, thank you. This is a modeling question. So what do you think the effect would be on the model if every driver for the TNCs were ADA, FTA credentialed?
I think Lamis and I discussed this as we were preparing for this meeting, is that the inability of TNCs to provide accessible transportation to people with mobility devices is really a huge barrier to making a same-day service with TNCs possible. I think, Lamis, if you back up to that one slide where you did the 2 filters, seeing at what would happen, what are the limits with based upon the mobility device versus what is the potential population that can be served by a same-day service. You get to see how limiting TNCs currently are in contributing to this type of same-day service. So when you intersect those 2 points, that on that third bullet there, only 17.7% of total access trips could be diverted to TNCs. So that really does kind of hit home that TNCs in their current form, in their current regulation, and how they're structured really do not fit very well when trying to serve a transit purpose that really does have to serve everyone. And so if you took away that condition, I think you'd see that 63.3% is the answer that you're looking for. So that's a huge barrier to actually deploying these services.
Paul, can I add something here?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so actually quite recently, we received an email, Lamis and I, from Steve Cummings, who is a marketing director, the marketing director for a so-called adaptive TNC service company. And I noticed that Steve is actually here among the audience. So we were really impressed by their effort, their really quick response to the service gap there by providing that service. You know, I don't know the capacity of this webinar. In fact, I would like to engage people like Steve in the discussion because so many seem to be, you know, good ideas and good efforts out there.
Yeah, you know, as you were talking about that, one of the things that kind of came into my mind was, I wonder if any transit authorities have what the dialogue has been with TNC providers about whether it's getting vehicles that allow for people with specific needs or working with them to get more of their drivers ADA, FTA credentialed and things like that.
Yeah, and to me, you know, there's a lot of talk in the industry and there's a lot of excitement around TNCs. And I think one of the things to take home is that like there's a lot of talk, but when you actually dig down to the data and you see how it applies to your system and your population, and when you're trying to apply it to a complex problem such as paratransit, there's no simple answer. And their current offerings really do not put TNCs in a position to help transit agencies with their paratransit program. There's just too many barriers to their service in order to make them feasible.
I would like to add one thing as well. So most of the analysis we did according to TNC prices in 2019, and that also adds another barrier. So TNC prices have also been changing. So that's another thing to consider. So even their average prices are no longer as predictable as they used to be.
Yeah, as we see wage pressures increase, they're just going to creep closer to what you would pay for a taxi. And so eventually those prices will probably converge.
This is Don. I just want to add, in King County, Seattle, in Seattle specifically, they changed kind of a policy where TNCs have to charge was what Seattle considered a living wage. And so their rates went up about 50% for trips that begin or exist within Seattle. So their rates are actually a little bit higher than cabs in the city, but they're cheaper in the county. So that even makes it even more complex for our pilot. This happened right around 2019. So then our prices are even further off. There's a index increase in Seattle plus a surge pricing during peak hours. The second thing I do want to say about TNCs is they are talking more with government agencies. We're working on a centralized call center for all accessible cabs that have lift-equipped vehicles, and we're working with TNCs to maybe work with them as well to maybe play some role in this, where either they would use that call center for their trips that have or need a lift-equipped vehicle. The latter part, though, is because of the pandemic, more than half the drivers on taxis and a significant number on TNCs are currently not in service in the King County area. So launching any type of pilot is extremely difficult right now when neither services are extremely reliable as far as being available.
Great, thank you. I have another one here. Well, so I guess first let me say, and this gets back to Qing, you were asking about the webinar capabilities. I do have the ability to promote people from the audience to the panel. So if there's someone who we really want to get some input from, I can certainly do that. You guys just let me know. I do have another question that came in. It would be interesting to hear from agencies who are actually using TNCs in their overall service mix. Would it be possible to have a follow-up session with agencies providing TNC-based services to hear about their and the riders' experiences? I guess from the PacTrans side, we would certainly be willing to facilitate a follow-up webinar. I don't know how the rest of the panel here feels about that. Let's see. Chris from Uber here. Uber currently onboards WAVs in specific cases with agencies. For what it's worth, lots of challenges, but we are working to build our partnerships with agencies and looking for them to lead as we support them the best we can.
And Steve Yaffe's question, do you mean via in San Antonio or via the software company? I believe Casey Gifford is here and has been working with via the software company.
Oh, the software company, yeah. He's referring to the software company.
Got it.
I don't know if Casey wants to jump on and talk at all about that, or if any of you want to talk at all about that. I'm not certain whether we have anyone here from via Hampton Road Transit right now.
Sorry, what was the question?
Is the question was, is anyone from via Hampton Road Transit on this webinar, because their perspective on the conversation would be interesting. So perhaps if you could talk a little bit about the work you're doing with VIA software.
Sure. We're actually working with VIA in their capacity as a transportation as a service provider. They provide on-demand flexible services on behalf of Metro. In certain areas of the county, it's what we call feeder to fixed route service, where riders can request rides on demand, and one end of their trip needs to be a designated transit or community hub, and then the other end of their trip needs to be anywhere within the service area. They are operating as a TNC, but they are paying their drivers an hourly rate. The vehicles are dedicated vehicles. Most customers pay with an Orca transit card. So it's different from a lot of, more traditional TNCs. They're also only operating for Metro. So the service is available to the general public, but as Metro customers and only within our service parameters. They do have wheelchair accessible vehicles and drivers that are trained. It's a subset of the fleet. Yeah, I don't know if there are specific questions about their operations. I can't speak on their behalf. I can just speak about what they're doing for us.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Another question, speaking specifically to rider experience, did the research look at riders' experiences, for example, rider satisfaction, likes and dislikes about opt-in services, comparison to OTP, ride times, etc.?
I can take that actually. So in short, no, because we did not analyze an existing pilot. We just looked at ADA Paratransit trips and tried to investigate the maximum potential for trip diversion. So we're not even adding that other layer of basically mode choice for the clients, which will further probably reduce the trip diversion rate. So in short, no, because we only looked at ADA Paratransit trips, and we did not analyze any existing pilot data.
Great, thank you. And I guess as we're on the data topic, I had another question come to me through the chat, kind of asking about a few questions about kind of how the data was most useful. Specifically, could you elaborate on the operational efficiency measure, as well as future improvement?
Well, the data definitely was useful because we investigated the maximum potential given the barriers of existing business model for TNCs and also requirements for ADA Paratransit trips specifically. So that gives an idea, well, gives many ideas. So the operational efficiency measure does add a lot to, even when King County Metro or other transit agencies want to select the participants for a pilot, even like before expanding that service, they have a lot to consider prior to that. And the geographic location or home location of that client is definitely an important thing to also consider. So not only like the different age groups as other pilots did. So that's that. And the other part, sorry, there were two parts to your question, right?
Right. So a little bit about elaborating on the optimal efficiency measures.
Yeah.
Sorry,
so the
operational efficiency measures.
Yeah, and the other thing, so the reason we also did that measure is because other pilot projects kind of focused on cost efficiency and did not look, so the overall cost reduction as well, and did not clearly examine what also happens to existing ADA Paratransit service when the trip diversion is happening. So is that, if we look at it solely, like, is that increasing in its efficiency, decreasing? Is that being impacted? Are the waiting times are increasing? Is it still as accessible as it used to be? Because as I mentioned in the FTA regulations, that service should always be available to clients and they always have the right to book trips using that service. So it's really important to also consider what happens to conventional ADA Paratransit service as we're doing the trip diversion. And our way to look at it was to look at what happens to the mile per passenger, because we did not have coast specific data. And how does that change geographically speaking as well?
And, I want to add something because I had a larger role in the beginning, but, when we were looking at a lot of pilots, we saw that a lot were starting at lower dollar amounts, $15, $20, even 12. And we realized we had to do some sort of data analysis because every region is different, and you can't just take something off, the internet or a pilot and just adopt it in your area and see what happens. So we did further analysis. And when we looked at initially, $15, $20, we realized that had we started there we would have early learned that there was no potential for diversion there that would have saved us any money or helped the majority of our customers. So thankfully to Lamis, I was surprised to find out that even at 40, the number was much less than we thought. As far as when you take in the ability to only add curb to curb, our gigantic geographic area, we're like the 12th or 13th largest county in the nation. And then the other dynamics of, you know, the dollar amount limiting the distance. And so even at 40, it was remarkably smaller than we thought. So thank God we didn't just go out there and test something quickly, that we had the advantage of Lamis to really find out what our limitations were with what we had. And secondly, we did do a small test on taxis. Because taxis do have accessible vehicles, we wanted to see what their capacity was. We know that in King County and Seattle, the ratio for TNCs to cabs are like 5 to 1, if not more. And what we quickly learned was the cab industry has been adjusting to the competition. And so when before they were available 24 hours a day and they'd lease out their second shift, they weren't doing that anymore because nobody wanted the second shift. They basically only operated from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. They were very urban specific, which we kind of already knew, but there's specific limitations within the taxi industry as they changed their model to be, you know, to gain revenue, that also would make it very difficult to do a same-day service pilot with just taxis or even with both. The limited amount of accessible vehicles with cabs alone are no longer available. And this was even pre-pandemic. So it's concerning when you look at your service options in the marketplace to do a same-day service pilot. And I think what's one other thing unique about King County is I think we have a higher percentage of people who use the Lyft for our access vehicles. I don't know, Jeremy can speak to that, but if we have a higher level of people that need a Lyft equipped vehicle and we don't have enough of them for a pilot, you know, that makes the equity issue even more of a concern before we even start a pilot.
Yeah, Don is right. And about 50% of our customers indicate that they require a lift to board. So that's either they have an ambulatory issue or more often they are in a wheelchair. So just the population that we're looking at really does have a high likelihood of needing, you know, a wheelchair accessible vehicle if they want to go to a different service. And I did want to come back to something that Lamis pointed out is, you know, that this same-day services, the aspect of taking these customers off paratransit and putting them on a same-day service does have effects on a paratransit service if you get a significant number of folks to do that. And I think one of the things that our geographic study points out is that, you know, those benefits or those impacts are in some of the highest productivity areas of our service area. And so for the bean counters who are looking at, you know, cost per passenger, our cost per passenger would go up if in that case. And so that is something that has to be taken into account. Either leadership has to be prepared or it has to be, you know, part of your business plan when starting up same-day service is that the knock-on effects on your ADA paratransit service are possible.
Great. And then a quick question. What % of King County Metro access trips are agency-based?
I think that's about, it was 20%-ish, if my memory serves me. Jeremy may have a better idea, but right at this present, there are 0 in essence, because most of those locations are closed due to COVID.
Okay. Another question that came into me through the chat. How can trip diversion be increased? Which of these barriers is removable?
I can maybe start off. I think one thing as we're doing our research, one of the things that I think is starting to develop it seems like in the TNC space is going above just providing a curb to curb service and going to like a door to door or higher level of service. I think that is a barrier that feels like could be fairly easy to achieve just by additional training of drivers. So off the top of my head, that seems like one that is actually in the process of maybe going away, but also feels fairly easy to remove.
Adding to that, I'm wondering whether the company Steve is working for, whether the service area is for the moment limited, whether they have planned to provide, the service with trained drivers. And I don't know whether Steve can type in a few pieces of information.
He can certainly do that into the chat. Yeah. So as that comes up, we can relay that information.
Or we said Steve can join us, right? Or he could speak.
Yes, I can absolutely promote him to a panelist, and he can hop on if he feels comfortable with that.
Yeah, Steve, feel free to share your answers verbally. Type them.
Oh, I can just allow him to talk. Look at that. Zoom's getting better at these things.
Hello, good people. Thanks for the opportunity. To answer the question real quickly, I feel a little sheepish about hijacking this conversation, but I do appreciate the opportunity to answer. I think the question was our plans to provide a larger service area. We do currently partner largely with transit agencies, and as far as the service area, it is prescribed and outlined by those transit agencies. But I will tell you, in our initial market where we're based here in Richmond, Virginia, the GRTC in 2018, when we started with them as a supplemental service to their paratransit, it has, after many years, because the driver pool is here, you've got suburban Chesterfield County to the south of us, their social service agencies using us, and sort of exurb rural county above us, Hanover, their senior care and a dialysis center and even a volunteer church group system is able to leverage our drivers. So once we are in a market, it's not only the area for the transit agencies to define, but other mobility disadvantaged populations and agencies that support them are able to use our adaptive TNC model. Does that answer the question?
Qing, does that answer your question?
Yes, and I actually also like to hear from, if possible, the other Steve Cummings about their plan in perhaps working with additional agencies, and they quickly perhaps some notes about their experience.
Go for it.
Yeah, I feel super sheepish about this. So we're currently with 11 transit agencies across the country. We have 4 that are about to onboard, 1 in California, and a few others around the nation, including we just launched at MTA in Maryland, so Maryland Transit Authority. And we are a business, so we're happy to have discussions with other transit agencies and expand our services wherever we can.
Great. Thank you both.
Yep.
I know this was touched on a little bit, but this is another great question that just came in the Q&A box. Not sure how to do this in research, how to research this, but it might be possible to partially divert trips. So for example, a long paratransit trip could be diverted to a short TNC trip to or from highly accessible rail BRT networks.
This kind of is similar to what Via to Transit are doing, but by maybe making it more accessible, and probably folks at King County Metro, they know a better answer, but in King County, there's kind of a similar pilot. It's called Via to Transit that takes people in inaccessible areas to near stations or linked stations, which is more like a metro. So if that becomes more accessible and having more wheelchair accessible vehicles, that can probably overlap to some extent with access alternative services.
And Ron, to answer your question, we actually have looked at this. The population that can do that, at least in the Seattle metro area, is very small. And one of the limitations is that we do offer hand-to-hand service. So when you look at the loss of efficiency to the paratransit system, by sending some people to divert to a fixed point or a fixed rail service, but you still have to continue that vehicle en route with the hand-to-hand person, that negates cost efficiencies that you could gain by doing a feeder to fixed route service. So the population based upon our situation is very small, and it would negatively impact paratransit productivity too much.
Great, thank you. I think I want to say one thing. This has been the most active webinar that I've ever hosted, which is great. I love the discussion. But I've also been checking like 4 different places to make sure I'm not missing anything. I think I have asked all the questions that have come up. We do have another minute or two if anyone in the audience has another question. And then also I like to give the panel toward the end an opportunity if there's anything that they thought they might want to say earlier, anything that you think we missed, anything you want to make sure to drive any points home, just give you a moment if there's anything you want to say.
I'll say some words. I want to thank everybody for coming. I want to thank Lamis and Dr. Shen for all their work on this. They've been working hard. I do want to say that, I think their research actually opens up more questions that we still need to answer. Because you see that last slide that Lamis had up, the geographic distribution that would indicate losses of productivity across the geographic region that we serve. And you see that those losses aren't uniform, and that the urban structure within where people live actually does affect their ability to even take part in these same-day services or TNC type diversion. And that does raise questions of equity. That we may be exacerbating, certain conditions, inequities within the region by deploying these services in certain ways. So there's a whole host of questions that lead off from this that we really need to understand in order to deploy same-day services effectively.
And this is Don. I also want to thank Lamis for all of her hard work, for finding out things that I didn't even know or expect to find out, and to save us from starting a pilot that would have not been in the best interest of anybody, and Dr. Shen for all of his support, and of course to my partners here, Matthew, Jeremy, and Casey, for really looking at reshaping what this pilot should be that could best help not only the county as far as Metro, but especially our customers. And just to let you know, we're doing a very inclusive analysis where we're meeting with stakeholders, including customers, which we just had our first part yesterday, where we had a lot of customer input on their experiences with access, and also their experience using cabs. And and they said great things about Via, by the way. And on my experience working with Uber and Lyft, who've been very helpful here in King County.
Yeah, I'd like to just echo what Dawn and Matthew said. It's been a great experience, and really appreciate the work that Lamis and Dr. Shen put into this. I think it shows what the great work that can happen when academic institutions and public agencies partner together to better understand transit issues and develop solutions. So thank you for your work, and it was very worthwhile experience.
Well, I'd like to also take this, sorry. Yeah.
Go ahead. Lamis,
Okay,
go ahead.
so you're the last as the PI. So yeah, I'd like to thank everyone, and especially King County Metro team. You've been wonderful. You went above and beyond what we expected you to help us. Not even in this project, you were always sharing data and necessary information with us. And you've been, again, like you've been a wonderful part of my PhD journey. And I'd also like to thank Dr. Shen for his great support and supervision. And I'll yield it to you, Shen.
Well, thank everybody. I have had a wonderful experience working with this group. It's something that I feel very rewarded, wonderful experience. I want to add one more thing technically. Lamis and I, towards the later stage of the research, we were discussing how to work with the King County Metro in terms of designing the pilot, especially in terms of participation of clients. And I'm pretty sure that other agencies or researchers involved in similar pilots would have some good experience to share, so that the participation on one hand address concerns about equity, as Matthew mentioned early on, but also would be really valid from statistical point of view for expanding pilot into a wider application. So if there is a future follow-up webinar, I hope that in the audience, anyone who has real insights on that would be really valuable to contribute to the discussion. Thank you, everybody, again.
Great. And again, I'll add my thanks. If you didn't hear me say it already, all of the resources, the PowerPoint you saw today, the technical course that was designed with a few different training modules for how you can do some of these analyses yourself, will all be shared publicly. So look for that in your inbox in the coming days and weeks. And then just based on the excitement and the conversation we've had today, I'm sure we will come up with another webinar topic or two on this subject, and hopefully get some other speakers in to hear more about the landscape and how we can move this conversation forward. So with that, thank you everyone for joining today, and have a great evening.